the violent protest that has been witnessed in Nepal. Now, tensions have escalated dramatically in Kathmandu as protests led by Gen Z demonstrators turned violent earlier today, leaving 9 people dead and dozens more injured. Amid the escalating violence, the Facebook page Gen Z Nepal, a key platform behind the protest, has issued an urgent appeal for calm, urging all demonstrators to return home. The statement reads, and I quote, "Many groups with selfish interests are inciting the crowd. Our mission for today has been successful. Please leave the area safely and immediately." Unquote. The protest, which began as a peaceful movement against the government's sudden ban on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp and other social media platforms, quickly spiraled out of control. Thousands of youth, many born between 1997 and 2012, poured into the streets demanding not just digital freedom, but also urgent action against deep-rooted corruption in the country. The situation took a dangerous turn when protesters stormed the federal parliament premises in New Baneshwar. Clashes erupted as demonstrators broke through barricades, climbed over gates and confronted security forces. In response, authorities deployed tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowd. In a swift move to regain control, the Kathmandu District Administration Office has imposed a strict curfew from 12:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. in key areas including New Baneshwar, Bijuli Bazar, Tinkune and Shankhamul. The protests have also spread to other major cities including Pokhara, Butwal and Biratnagar, raising concerns about further unrest nationwide. Now, as the situation continues to unfold, authorities remain on a high alert and the nation watches closely, grappling with a generational call for a change. Well, those are the visuals on your screens right now, where the security forces had to resort to water cannons and tear gas shelling to disperse the crowd. The crowd primarily constitutes Gen Z youth who were upset with the sudden clampdown on social media platforms. Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook decided to take to streets and challenge the government authorities, where they even tried to break into the parliament. There has been a curfew that has now been imposed from 12:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. to avoid any untoward incident. But today, the violence had also claimed 9 lives, while several others have been injured. This has been orchestrated through a Facebook page called Gen Z Nepal that later put out a statement saying that the mission for today is over, requesting all the protesters and demonstrators to return home because there are certain vested interest groups that seem to have interspersed into the crowd and are now inciting the mob. It remains to be seen whether there's going to be any outreach from the government's end, but it appears that Nepal is bracing itself against demonstrations and protests that may even turn violent in the days ahead as well. My colleague Kabir Naqvi is joining me right now to get us all the details and basically break it down for us as to what exactly led to this sudden outpouring of crowd.
Well, many thanks, Samya, for letting me piece of the studio at this point in time. It is the top development that we are tracking from our studios here in News9. We got on to this, information, and it's so ironic that the first few pictures that did come across from what the streets, for Kathmandu, they came to us via social media, and that's the same social media platform that has in fact been banned, and it's a blanket ban across 26 of these various social media platforms by the KP Oli led dispensation. You rightly pointed out that was a Facebook page called Gen Z that is called for this clarion call. 5 days back is when the Prime Minister actually put out this ban. He said that independence cannot be undermined, freedom cannot be undermined, national sovereignty has to take precedence over everything else. And the essential issue is that there is a particular law in place where the Nepalese government wanted all of these 26 social media intermediaries to register themselves as, acting as state vigilance tools, for their own people. That is something that WhatsApp, Instagram, WeChat, Signal, a long list of these 26 social media platforms said a big no to, which is why there was a blanket ban. And lo and behold, the Gen Z has taken matters into their own hands. They say that this is a digitally repressive law that was coming about. This move is digitally repressive. Not only have you, put a clamp down on our freedom of expression, but you've also done the same when it comes to our digital connectivity, which is a major means of staying connected across the rest of the world. And when we're talking about what's happening in and around our own neighborhood, take a look at what happened in Bangladesh. Many of that protest in the toppling of the Sheikh Hasina government was carried out on social media. At the same time, look at what happened in Sri Lanka. Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the family had to flee because, well, social media became that linchpin to connect people, to mobilize people and bring them together. This doesn't seem to be the reason, but it is the bone of contention why so many youth are out there onto the streets. I was earlier speaking to some journalists on the ground over there, because it's not all Gen Z. And for those who don't know what Gen Z is, Gen Z are basically kids that have been born between 1997 and then so on. Anybody who's been born after 1997 falls into the Gen Z basket, and everybody before that is a millennial. So Gen Z, they thrive on social media. Pretty much everything's happening on this little piece of appliance. Your life, your love, your romance, your business, your economics, your news consumption, everything happens on social media. So why put a blanket ban on social media? Couple that with factors of rampant corruption, because mind you, several journalists, youth that are not Gen Z but still are miffed with the KP Oli-led dispensation. And now the political chess pieces are also moving, because Kathmandu's mayor has also come out and backed this particular protest. He has been a rapper. He's got several anti-establishment rap songs that got famous back in the day. He is quite old, so hence the mayor of Kathmandu cannot come out and actually take part in these protests, but he has been a votary of raising your voice, of peaceful dissent when it comes to matters of raising your voice up against some of the government's moves. Now, is this a litmus test for KP Oli? If it is a litmus test for KP Oli, how big of a test is this for KP Oli? And at the same point in time, Samya, one also has to take a look at that. Are there any learning lessons? Because all of this is happening in our own neighborhood. We've got a lot of Gen Z here back at home in India as well. So now, should we now look at Gen Z as another political constituency for them taking matters into their own hands? What we're also picking up is that 9 people have lost their lives. These are official data that we've got. The numbers could change very well at this point in time, but we still don't know as to what the actual figure is. Official data suggests 9 people have lost their lives in these skirmishes, because it's a very important position for the law enforcement agencies. It's great that the crowd gets swollen up. All these federal parliament buildings, they're under siege by the people, let alone the Nepalese youth. But it is actually the police officials, it is the law enforcement agency officials and personnel that have to, exercise massive resolve, have to exercise great amounts of patience, because things can go awry within a second. Take a look at what happened in Indonesia. A proper protest that was already on against the government's moves and the government's taxations, and of course corruption being part of that, unemployment being a part of that. But one delivery boy gets killed and the entire delivery community comes together, and that entire protest blows out of proportion. The same happened in Kenya, when protests against the government took a different turn when a journalist got killed. And this entire fiasco that we've been seeing on the streets of Kathmandu, Samya, has the recipe for a same sort of disaster. And lo and behold, already we've lost 9 lives, more than 80 people getting treatment at various trauma centers, because the situation is such. And this is not just Kathmandu, like you mentioned earlier, from Biratnagar to Butwal, major cities across Nepal are being affected by these so-called Gen Z protests. But critics are now pointing out, critics are now saying that if this in fact is Gen Z, who is backing them? KP Oli calls them puppets, but they can't all be puppets, can they? And if there are a huge amount of puppets in that multitude that is protesting on the streets of Kathmandu, who is backing them? That's a big question mark at this point in time, Samya. But all in all, acrimonious scenes on the streets of Kathmandu. We're going to continue to bring you details, pictures beaming right behind me, and we're getting live visuals. But it's ironic that we have to use social media to get what's happening in Kathmandu, where a social media ban has in fact led to the entire protests.
Absolutely, Kabir. And while there is a curfew that has been imposed in places like New Baneshwar, Bijuli Bazar, Tinkune and Shankamul, we do not know whether this is just going to be the calm before the storm, because there are going to be these calls for protests given again. Could this snowball into something bigger? Is the Oli government at a threat right now? What is the Oli government's game plan right now? Are they going to extend an olive branch? Will they come on the talking table? A lot of things over here that looks ambiguous, a lot of things that beg answers from the government's end. But in the interim, let's not rule out the fact that there are going to be vested interest groups that are going to take advantage of the volatile situation that is right now persisting in Kathmandu and several other cities as well. The visuals that we are putting across on your screens right now are only a few to reflect the magnitude of the violence and how there were emotionally charged youngsters of Nepal that took to streets trying to express their angst against the clampdown on social media, demanding answers from the Oli government, and also taking this opportunity to question the deep-seated corruption and perhaps expecting a change.
College-going students, full of that revolutionary sort of undertone and vibe in them. I'm just going to use some Gen Z, lingo here as well, because we need to understand what's really at play in Kathmandu. We've seen it time and again. There is some sort of political backing. This huge crowd, and things can take a different and awry turn given any second. Look at the riot gear that is already, with the law enforcement agencies over there. So the police, can we put those pictures up over here? The police already in their riot gear, they've got their machine guns, at a different point, several of them with loudspeakers, with batons. Look at these helmets. This is not your everyday police on the streets. This is riot gear. This is, these are special forces that have now been tasked to handle and manage this crowd. And it is upon these officials to maintain and exercise that resolve, because a baton here and somebody getting succumbing to those injuries will throw this entire campaign and blow it out of proportion. Will this continue to go on? Well, we'll have to wait and find out. Will the KP Oli government extend an olive branch? That's a great question, because KP Oli and his minister's cabinet is already, they're in a huddle right now. There's an emergency meeting that is underway, so we'll have to wait and find out what happens at that emergency meet. But it is a catch-22 situation, because KP Oli himself has come out and said that, okay, I'm allowing protests to take place. I'm a votary of raising your voice. But at the same time, he says that when it comes to national sovereignty, nothing goes, nothing does. We will continue to clamp down on these protests.
Right.
And these protesters, they continue to say, well, this is our freedom of expression. You're saying freedom of the nation cannot be undermined. Well, this is our freedom. We're fighting for our freedom is what the nation, the Nepalese youth, which is, let's say, 70% of this entire swollen up crowd.
But can they risk any more loss of life, Kabir? 9 deaths today. Over 80 people injured. That is a large number. I mean, in the garb of freedom of expression, can they compromise on the state's security? That is the larger question that we're looking at right now. Should there be a method to the madness that we are witnessing over here, whether it is the parliament, whether it is the breaching security forces? Was there intelligence about the protest turning violent or not? Is there any intelligence failure on the part of the Oli government? All these questions beg an answer, but one thing is very clear, that Nepal is at a stage right now. We saw similar protests happening in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and now 14 people who have died in Nepal. It is at this brink, a very sensitive, delicate brink. These protests can go awry, it can go either way. It can either bring about a revolution, or it can push your country into a state of absolute anarchy that we are looking at right now in Bangladesh. Is there any learning? Is there any taking of a leaf from these protests that either Bangladesh or Sri Lanka has witnessed? Would this also impact and spill over into India? Because we can't rule out, we are the bordering country.
Which is why this question is of grave significance, and it's a pertinent one to ask. I don't think I'm going to be willing to stick my neck out and say whether this is going to impact India right now or not. Samya, our borders are pretty tightly sealed, and the Nepalese leader, he was in India a couple of months back. So the ties between the two nations look to be pretty sound as well. And when you're talking about the diplomatic channels, I'm sure they're already open. The Ministry of External Affairs must have spoken to the Indian consulate over there and understand the situation, because a lot of Indians and a lot of business that's taking place in India. But in the terms of the learning lessons, let's not forget that Gen Z needs to now be looked at as a different political constituency. It cannot be undermined. This is social media that we're talking about. Our lives are out there on social media today, Samya. So much of it happens on social media, and I think which is why we're seeing so many of these people descending down onto the streets, because if you, this is their social media post, Samya. This is the youngsters' social media post. You're stopping them from posting on social media, which is why they've gotten down onto the streets.
Absolutely, Kabir. Thank you for getting us these details and actually breaking it down to bring about a larger perspective about what exactly led to these violent protests in Kathmandu.